Hello everyone, and welcome to GP1 Behind the Scenes. This is a full encompassing preseason show to the Grand Prix 1 racing series that will be taking place here. And this will be incredibly interesting because this is the first season that we'll be broadcasting Grand Prix 1, a racing series that goes all across the world. And some of the world's best European or best open wheel racing drivers will take part in some of the more interesting aspects of racing. 32 cars, to be precise, will take the grid, and 16 teams of 2, so 32 cars, and that will try and take on automotive supremacy here in GP1. So without further ado, I think we should get started with some of the teams. So the first team that we will be covering is Scuderia Ferrari, the Constructors' Championship champions last year. However, they did not win the Drivers' Championship as driver Kenny Myatt scored that honor, as Joki Lathinen and Kitsune Hashimoto will be piloting the two Ferraris. Hashimoto moves up from another team. Moves up from a team down the grid a little bit to replace, I believe, Daimir Bejianov. He left the team to pursue other racing ventures. However, he may be back later in the year. We're not sure, for another team. That's an interesting thing. Hashimoto, not much is known about Hashimoto, but Joki Lathinen was the main championship rival last year, as Lathinen is looking to possibly get further up the grid with that team. Great to see Hashimoto doing some great work with the that team Lathinen. Team looks very fast in preseason testing, and it's great to see Ferrari trying to stick it to Mercedes, who apparently has a really quick car. Maurizio Arrivabene, the team principal, states, "We are frankly tired of finishing behind Mercedes on a weekly basis. Our recent developments will be the David that topples the Goliath come this season." Even though they won the Constructors' Championship last year, it was mainly out of Mercedes' cars falling apart. And with Mercedes incredibly increasing their reliability, that could be very interesting going forward. The next team we will be talking about is Red Bull Racing, the fastest car on the grid so far this year. Led by Renault Hirose and Dutchman Christian van der Pesch, the young Dutch superstar. His father Donner van der Pesch, of course, was a former GP1 driver a couple of years, last racing, I believe, 10 years ago. Donner van der Pesch never really had the success in the series. Christian van der Pesch is still looking for his first victory, though, now that he has joined Red Bull Racing from the Jordan team. Van der Pesch is expected to be very strong. Hirose, however, is the lead driver. And like I said, these cars are incredibly quick today, during preseason testing. Very, very quick. Should be very interesting to watch them, especially when they get to tracks like Phillip Island and some of the lower speed tracks. Well, Phillip Island isn't exactly one of the lower speed tracks. Phillip Island's one of actually the more level-headed tracks. Some of the lower speed tracks like Monte Carlo, like Monaco, Monaco, Trois-Rivières, some other slower ones I'm trying to think of. Definitely not Falkenberg. Falkenberg's one of the quickest tracks we have on the schedule. But yeah, some of the slower speed tracks, Estoril's a slower one, Brands Hatch can be, etc. Those are the tracks where the Red Bull cars will definitely control the field, I believe. Haas F1 is the next team we are going to be talking about for the simple purpose that they're the third team to unveil this year. Haas has struggled a bit during preseason testing. They've shown some speed, but they haven't really shown a lot of consistency with their drivers. They do hold an all-American lineup of John Hart and Sam Curtis. That's one thing that they've wanted since the start of the season, or since the start of their career. They're one of the newer teams until this year on the grid in GP1. Haas is doing an awesome job, though, with getting some drivers set up for the future. and definitely having a nice American presence. John Arden has been a quiet star, though, in the Haas. I believe getting 4th in one of the preseason testing sessions here at Phillip Island. So it's going to be fun to see what the Haas team can do with their Ferrari motors. They're effectively the Ferrari B team outside of maybe Sauber. McLaren is the first of 2 Honda teams on the grid, led by drivers Ryan Walker, one of the more unlucky drivers, and Amy Shelley. Very stout lineup there for the McLaren lineup, but the Honda motor is once again going to be a big challenge for them. Honda seems to actually have a faster package now, but it still has plenty of reliability issues, the Honda does. And the Honda motor will be incredibly interesting to watch as this racing season goes on. Can the cars hold together throughout the course of a weekend? Of course, Ryan Walker is one of the most advanced drivers on the grid, of advanced age, with 10 GP1 victories. Amy Shelley's a little bit more of a young gun, trying to show what she has on the driving grid. Mercedes is the next team that we need to talk about, and they are one of the big 3. They, of course, won the Drivers' Championship last year with rookie Kenny Myatt last year. Myatt, of course, is mainly only here to try and go for the Triple Crown. He's won Indianapolis and Le Mans already, as he raced in the IndyCar series 2 years ago, and did the 24 Hours of Le Mans as a one-off. And he now is going for Monaco. He's already won the championship and 4 GP1 victories at Willow Springs, the United States West Race at Willow Springs, at Trois-Rivières in Canada, Falkenberg, the Swedish GP at Falkenberg, and the United States East Race, the finale at Road Atlanta. His teammate is the very popular Marcello Bocelli, brought in to kind of help develop that car even more to take on Ferrari. So Marcello Bocelli expected to be a very strong addition to AMG Mercedes. The Irish Jordan team has come on board with the second Honda, driving a second group of Honda. 2 rather young drivers, Benjamin Dangerfield and Joe Martin, will lead the field, will lead the Jordans around. The Jordans have had a lot of power issues in last year's Honda motors. However, they are a tad bit more reliable than the Hondas that McLaren's using. Simply because I think the team knows what they're doing. Dangerfield, however, is one of the biggest young stars out of Britain today. I'm expecting Benjamin Dangerfield to be a real threat for automotive supremacy here in the future of GP1. Coming off of a pretty good season last year, Aeros F1 in preseason testing has struggled with their new Asiatech engines. The Asiatech was last year the least powerful engine on the grid, and I would expect them to struggle with drivers Daniel Bouchard and Zayden Davidson. Both are relatively young drivers. Of course, Daniel Bouchard won a race with Sauber last year. A shocking race with Sauber. But, yeah, that was a very wild Monaco Grand Prix right there. So Daniel Bouchard is the reigning Monaco Grand Prix champion. But he has a lot of work to do with that new Aeros. And like I said, Zayden Davidson, an Australian, not a whole lot of know-how from the team. However, Tom Walkinshaw, the team principal, is from Australia, so it was kind of important to kind of get some Australian blood into the Aeros team. As I stated earlier, Sauber was shockingly won their first race of all time last year in GP1 at Monaco, after mainly everybody good fell out of the race. And roughly, they're probably the 4th best car on the grid right now, consistently, with Will Lewis, one of the more experienced drivers on the grid, coming off of injury, of course, Will Lewis is, and with Bobby Jones, another American, in the second car, cars 16 and 17. I'm expecting Will Lewis and Bobby Jones to really lead that team quite hard, as Bobby Jones is hunting for his first GP1 victory. However, with the speed he's been pulling in preseason testing with that new Sauber, I would expect that car to be very, very strong and them to be maybe contending for some victories. I'm not exactly sure if they're championship contenders, but Sauber ought to be a team to watch, if you ask me. It's now time for the most popular team on the grid, the Backmarkers, Minardi, the most fun team on the grid. Haven't scored a point in 6 years, but there's got to be something to love about poor Minardi. They're, like I said, the fans' favorite team. Minardi, however, it doesn't look like they'll be getting a point this year unless there's some really high attrition races. Their car looks pretty poorly, especially with that new Asiatech engine. Asiatech doesn't exactly have the most powerful engine on the grid, as I stated, with the Aeros team. And Minardi, with their drivers Zachary Fitzwater and Selena Van Dam, are expected to struggle a bit, as Van Dam is actually a late hire, as they were actually going after the driver of Jack Halleck, who got hired by the Toyota team. We'll get there in a minute. They were going after Halleck to try and grab him, but Halleck got a better drive with the, like I said, the Toyota team. Manor is one of 4 new teams on the grid this year, with drivers Cassandra Kennington and Juan Diego Malvina, who is a noted pay driver from Venezuela. And that might not last either, because the Venezuelan oil money is kind of drying up, much like Venezuelan oil. But anyway, yeah, Manor did not start off very strong this year. They are having a lot of issues with their new car. It is very aerodynamic, though, but it doesn't handle the best, and it virtually doesn't have a lot of power, despite having a Ferrari engine. Or, I'm sorry, a Mercedes engine. Doesn't have a lot of power. It's clearly some of Mercedes, like, D team Manor has been. Force India is under completely new management, and the team has struggled for funding. Very quickly, we might be calling them Force Canada at this rate, or Force One, as longtime driver Vijay Pushando, one of the most experienced drivers on the grid, with 1 GP1 victory to his name, and Cirelli Barakadid are piloting the 7 and 13 cars for Force India. Car looks okay, going to be a good midfielder team, but we are unsure of how that's going to turn out for the Force India team right there. And with ownership kind of in limbo, I would expect this team to have a volatile season. After a failed engine contract with Renault fell through, Prost Grand Prix is relegated to being the third Asiatech team, and Asiatech desperately needs a third team. Prost, however, wasn't exactly had a all-right year last year. However, Milorad Ryback and Tervain Garns are going to have a tough order ahead of them, taking the struggling Asiatech engine to the promised land of getting points for them. It's going to be a struggle for them and the other Asiatech teams to get points this year, especially considering the lack of power that they've got. However, the Prost team seems to have the best chassis of the Asiatech brigade and all the rear fielders. And remember, they're going to be fighting with Manor, Minardi, and Aeros, so that might end up promoting them to 4th best of that group. Williams F1 is probably the 5th best car on the grid. However, that is not an improvement from last year, where they were 3rd in Constructors' Championship. Williams has kind of struggled with drivers Murad Sultan and Jorge Martin driving for them. Their cars seem to not want to grip to the road. They are a friggin' bullet in a straight line, but their Mercedes engines really are kind of heavy, and that car doesn't make it want to handle that well. Very good at the point-and-shoot tracks, though. Something like Shanghai might be a place where Williams will really be a championship, a race-winning contender. This team of Williams is probably fighting for Prost for the best of the rest that aren't the big 3 teams of Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes. I would say Williams is probably fighting with McLaren and Sauber for that honor. Toyota brings a very interesting new team to the grid this year, with drivers of Claudia Dreyfus, I apologize there, and an Australian Jack Halleck. Halleck is, of course, probably the biggest young rookie hotshot coming into the league, And Dreyfus is a sophomore driver looking to try and improve her results a little bit here. Toyota probably out of the new teams is the best off with kind of the way that the situation is going. I mean, granted, the next two teams, the final two teams on the grid, both have experienced running teams, but Toyota has had a whole year of development on their car. So I would expect Toyota to be a very formidable opponent in the midfield. Maybe to even in preseason testing, they've been quick enough to look toward the top of that fourth best team mark, led by Sauber and Williams and McLaren. So they could be fighting for that as well. Toyota is definitely not a slouch team, though. They definitely are quite stout in the speed department and in chassis department. However, the Toyota engine, they're the only Toyota on the grid, and next year we might be seeing another team jump to Toyota, especially if some of these teams have some cost issues or if there's more new teams on the horizon. The main reason why Prost didn't get Renault engines is mainly because of a situation that happened last year from the Renault Benetton team. As Renault and Benetton have really separated their marks, as Benetton wanted to kind of go off on their own without being completely guided by Renault, the company. They still are using Renault engines contractually. However, Renault wanted their own factory team, and Benetton really didn't want that honor of that because some of the Benetton ownership did not want Renault engines for long term. They're looking for an engine deal next year. And we'll get to Benetton next. However, Marc-Lothaire Irvine is the Renault factory driver, and Harold King, another kind of an interesting driver. Harold King is a GP1 driver 2 years ago for the failed Caterham team. However, he now is back in the series after having some issues, and we are going to see if Harold King can do anything with that team. However, there's a lot of lawsuits going on between Renault and the Benetton team. Without further ado, let's look at Benetton. And Benetton has really struggled with their speed this year so far. They aren't exactly the slowest car on the grid, and they are kind of in points-paying contention. However, Benetton, their little argument with Renault has really separated a divide between the two, and there's a lot of threat that Benetton will not get a lot of factory support from Renault, only enough to mainly get themselves going this season. As Benetton this year's main goal is look toward next year and develop a car for their new engine supplier. Benetton could be a factor for Toyota to look up for next year. However, we are not sure of that. Their driver lineup of Tyler Thaber and Angel Navarro will be interesting to watch because, like I said, those two drivers, they have a very good lineup of experienced drivers. But right now, their car, like I said, their car doesn't look that bad, but they don't have a lot of factory support from Renault. And because of Renault having to support an extra team because of the split between Renault and Benetton, and because of legally Renault had to supply an engine to Benetton, that really cost the Prost team, who was supposed to get a Renault deal. However, it wouldn't surprise me if Prost gets Renault engines next year. However, this year is essentially a lost cause for Prost because Benetton and Renault essentially are having a hissy fit about who has to supply what. And Benetton isn't exactly that happy with Renault, like I said. And so the big thing is where's Benetton going to go next year? Toyota's a possibility, etc. And there's some other new manufacturers coming out. Fundamentals looking at coming in as well, and Mazda as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see what Benetton's going to do. As Benetton, like Prost, is mainly looking towards next year, especially if their season doesn't start off well. So, with that being said, that's your team so far of this year. Let's just take a quick overview of the schedule. So here's the schedule for this season. Australia is the Phillip Island circuit, like it's been for the season opener. It's been since 2012, when Phillip Island took over the Australian race from Adelaide. South Africa has been under a lot of question because of Keilani's safety concerns. The track hasn't been updated in a long time. Keilani hasn't. So there's a lot of concerns about the safety of that track. United States West, once again, is the Willow Springs Circuit, which was new 2 years ago on the schedule. Monaco is, of course, the most prestigious race of the year. Brno now is on the schedule for the Czech Republic, replacing the Spanish race at Catalunya. Canada has always been a Trois Rivets for a while. Road America finally gets a spot on the schedule. They've been dying for one, but because the Streets of Chicago race didn't exactly go that well. Mexico is at Mexico City. One of the fan favorite tracks, Falkenberg, even though it's not exactly the raciest track on the schedule, it is one of the fastest and one of the kind of the most technical circuits on the schedule because of how quick it is. There's only one real breaking point on it. Brands Hatch is a fan favorite, doing an alternating year with Silverstone every other year, so this year we're at Brands Hatch. Hockenheim has round 11 for Germany. Belgium is once again at Spa. Estoril joins the schedule this year at round 13, replacing the round of Hungary. China, Japan, and Japan at Shanghai and Suzuka. They've been relative staples since Japan's been on for a long time at Suzuka, and China's been around since 2004. And United States East race at Road Atlanta has been around since Watkins Glen lost the race in 2007. Tracks to watch out for, like I said, are Monaco, obviously, and some of the more competitive races like Willow Springs, and definitely Road Atlanta has been one of the more competitive tracks on the schedule recently as well. So with that being said, we have a very, very awesome GP1 schedule ahead of us. We cannot wait to see you in Phillip Island for the Round of Australia.